Deep dives and blue skies. Welcome back to Talking Blue with Nick, the best Dodgers analytical podcast that you can find. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Talking Blue, the best Dodgers analytical podcast that you can find. I am your host, Nick. Today you are listening to episode 70 of Talking Blue. 70 episodes. Thank you guys so much for all your support. We are finally here to recap the NLCS, Game 4, the Dodgers going to the World Series, all of that. So first of all, I'm apologizing because I'm so late to the party. At the time of this recording, it is Monday, October 20th. The Dodgers won the pennant Friday night, which was on October 17th. So I'm going to recap all that. Talk about Game 4. I also missed Game 3. I'm not going to recap that, but the Dodgers obviously won that game. They obviously also won Game 4. They're going back to the World Series. I'm going to recap all of that stuff, quickly go through the game, and then pretty much honestly, we're going to talk about Shohei because it was a one-man show in Game 4, and then we'll get ready for what's to possibly come out of the ALCS and who will be the Dodgers' opponent, and then later in the week I should be able to preview the World Series. So, as always, you can get this podcast on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can follow us on all social media at Talking Blue Pod. You can follow myself at Talking Blue Nick on X. And then on Reddit, you can follow us at competitive-week8715. I haven't talked to you guys in a little bit. The last time I left you, the Dodgers had a 2-0 lead in the NLCS. They went on to win Game 3. Tyler Glasnow pitched pretty good in that game. Obviously, some guys came out of the bullpen. Blake Trinan, Anthony Banda, Vesia, and then Roki Sasaki. It was a really well-played game. Score early in the first inning. The Brewers came back and tied it. But then later on in the 5th or 6th inning, Dodgers put a little rally together. Tommy Edman, they benefited from a throwing error from the pitcher on a pickoff, took the lead, and then the bullpen was able to hold it down, take a 3-0 lead. And as I told you guys before, you take a 3-0 lead in the NLCS, you know, we pretty much put the kill shot on the Brewers, so they were able to do that. So Game 4 comes around, and we have Shohei Ohtani making the start, his second start of the postseason, and then we also have Jose Quintana getting the start for the Brewers. So I liked the matchup for the Dodgers. I thought they could hit Quintana pretty well. And I actually, I'll be honest, going into that game, I felt like Shohei was going to leave his mark on the series. I didn't think he was going to go on to do exactly what he did. He kind of blew my expectations out of the water and then some. But I thought he was going to hit a little bit better at the plate and also, pitch the Dodgers to the World Series because he had the ball for that game. So I was pretty excited for that. First inning, Shohei let off a leadoff walk to Bryce Terang, but then he proceeded to strike out the next 3 hitters. Then, of course, he leads off the bottom of the first. 3-2 count from Jose Quintana, hanging slider. Shohei absolutely demolishes it, almost hits it out of the stadium. 1-0 Dodgers. And then later in that inning, the Dodgers would tally on another run on a Tommy Edman single, and then on a Teoscar Hernandez ground out. So it would get the Dodgers would get 3 runs in that inning all the way to the 4th inning. Shohei's still on the mound, of course. He's through 4 scoreless innings at this point. Chad Patrick comes into the game to relieve Jose Quintana. And then Shohei hits his second home run of the game, a little cutter inside. Shohei literally hit the ball out of the stadium. 7th inning, Trevor McGill comes in to replace Chad Patrick on a 1-2 pitch, fastball right down the middle. Shohei hits the ball out to dead center, left center for his 3rd home run of the game. Now it is a 5-0 game. The Brewers would tally on 1 run in the 8th inning on a RBI ground out. Bryce Terang beat out a double play ball, so the Brewers would get on the board. Later on in the 9th inning, we go to the 9th. Roki Sasaki comes in. He gets William Contreras started off the inning with a ground ball single, but then Andrew Vaughn flew out to right field. Sal Frelick grounded into a force out, and then Caleb Durbin comes up. He flies out to Andy Paz in right field for the 3rd out of the inning and for the final out of the game. The series is over. The game is over. The Dodgers win by a score of 5-1. They sweep the Milwaukee Brewers. They win all 4 games. Pretty much dominated the NLCS. Quickly, Shohei for 6, Vesia for 1, Blake Trinan for 1, Anthony Bondo went 2/3 of an inning, and then, of course, Roki Sasaki went 1 inning. It wasn't a save opportunity, but he gets the final out. Pretty much just going to talk about Shohei and all the amazing stuff that he did, and just kind of like what my thoughts were watching the game, because obviously it was just insane stuff. Everyone's calling it the greatest postseason performance of all time, and I don't know how anyone could disagree with that, because there is nobody who's ever pitched that many innings, struck out that many hitters, and hit that many home runs all in one game. Quickly on the mound for Shohei, his final line: 6 innings pitched, 2 hits allowed. He gave up no earned runs, 3 walks, 10 strikeouts. He was able to pitch around a little bit of traffic. There wasn't too much traffic. I think it was in the 4th inning where there was a runner on third with with 1 out. Then he struck out William Contreras, and then he ended up striking out the first baseman. I'm forgetting his name, but he pitched out of some traffic. So those were some pretty cool moments. Ridiculous stuff. Shohei single-handedly won that game for the Dodgers, pretty much. Shohei threw an even 100 pitches. The fastball velocity was averaging 98.5. He really threw like he tends to do, the whole kitchen sink at the Brewers. Threw 7 different pitches. And something that I thought was really interesting is he threw a lot more splitters. So far in this postseason, he has increased the usage on his splitter. And it's something I've learned about Shohei watching him pitch. I don't know if he's always done this throughout his career, but try to mix up his pitch mix. He doesn't like to be repeatable or predictable. Early on, when he first came back, he actually threw a lot of sinkers. He threw a lot of sweepers and sliders. Eventually, as the season went on, he mixed in more curveballs and stuff like that. I remember a start against the Reds where he threw a career high in curveballs. And ever since then, that's kind of been the mix. He uses all those pitches, but he really uses the curveball to lefties as the out pitch. And then in this postseason, he mixed in more splitters. If you go back and watch his first start against the Phillies, a lot of splitters. He threw some really nasty ones to Schwarber and to Harper, guys like that. And then in this start, while he didn't have it early in the game, he finished off the game with a lot of splitters, a couple of strikeouts to Collins, the left fielder, Bryce Terang, as well as Jake Bauers. So he really leaned on that splitter. He only threw 9 in the game, but like I said, early on in the game, it was a lot of fastballs. The velo was up. He was getting some swings and misses on the fastball and the really nasty sweeper that he uses. And then, like I said, later in the game, he kind of mixed in more splitters. So 35% four-seamer, 22% sweeper, 13% cutter. So he did bring the cutter along, which is a pitch that Shohei will either use a lot like he did today or kind of like not use it at all. And then an even 9% on the splitter, slider, and curveball. And then he also threw 3 sinkers. 19 whiffs in the game, so a ton of swings and misses. 6 of them were on the four-seamer. 5 of them were on the splitter, like I said. So a lot of whiffs on the fastball and on the splitter. So it was a pretty dominant pitching performance. Like I said, only 2 hits. I forget who had the 2 hits, but he did allow 3 walks. The first batter of the game, Bryce Terang, he walked. But after that, he really kind of locked in with the command. Like I said, the four-seam fastball was electric. He is really a fun pitcher to watch. It's obviously just amazing that he's able to hit and pitch. But if he was just a pitcher alone, he really is like a fun pitcher to watch on the mound because of how many pitches he throws. He uses the four-seamer to both lefties and righties. And then when he's facing right-handed hitters, it's usually sweeper. And then, a little bit of sinkers. And then against lefties, he'll use the splitter. He'll also use the other slider that he throws, which is a harder slider. He kind of has 2 different sliders, where the sweeper is the more traditional big left to right breaking ball, right to left, I should say. And then the slider that he throws is more of a gyro slider that kind of like goes down. Obviously it has the left turn, but it still kind of has that sharp downward break, and he'll use that to lefties and righties. And then the curveball, he'll also use to righties, but mostly lefties. So he just has like a really elite pitch mix. And what's really interesting, like I said, with the splitter, and what's just really fun, is that Shohei's kind of gone away from that pitch as his career has gone on. When Shohei first broke into the league in 2018, and obviously he was like, this interesting player, two-way player, but what was he going to look like? When he came into the league, it was, mostly thought that he was a much better pitcher than he was a hitter. And what made him really, really elite, obviously, amongst a lot of things, the velo and the command and all that stuff, his splitter was like otherworldly. Like, his splitter was the best pitch in the game. Never got hit. I actually saw a stat today that in his entire career, on the mound in the big leagues, which dates back to 2018, obviously not a ton of innings because he's been injured, but he's only given up 3 career home runs on his splitter. So that pitch was so nasty for him earlier in his career. But then as his career unfolded and he dealt with a little bit of injuries, and also as his pitch mix changed, like incorporating more sweepers, he kind of went away from that pitch a little bit. And, it's known that a splitter can put some stress on your elbow because of the way you throw it. It can, some pitchers, it can kind of put some stress on your forearm and on your elbow. So some pitchers don't love to throw that pitch. But obviously in the big leagues right now, it's one of the more like sexy pitches that a lot of pitchers throw a lot of. And I would imagine that he kind of went away from that pitch so far this year because he came back from, surgery. And, but clearly in this postseason, he's fallen back in love with that pitch. And I wouldn't be shocked if next year in 2026, he uses that pitch a lot more than he did. And it just, it's a really dominant pitch. And if you've watched it this postseason, it's been one of his better out pitches. And I just think it's interesting, like I said earlier, how he's kind of willing to always change and like not be repeatable. He's actually said that a lot in post-game conferences or interviews. Like, his going into the game, his game plan was to not be predictable, to really mix it up. So, they always talk about when you're a pitcher, Oral Hershiser always talks about this, when you're a pitcher who throws a lot of pitches versus someone who just throws a few. And, sometimes there are pitchers who throw so many pitches, and it kind of can become, too difficult to maneuver a game because you're using so many pitches. And it's kind of easier for some guys to just zero in on a couple pitches, like my fastball, my slider, and my changeup. Guys who just throw 3 pitches, like Chris Sale of the Braves. Like, he's just fastball, slider, changeup, and sometimes it's just fastball, slider. There are certain guys like that. And then the counter against that, when you have a ton of pitches, is that every day, every start, you can kind of feel out which pitch is kind of working best for you. So if you're a guy like Shohei who throws 2 different fastballs, 4-seam sinker, 2 different sliders, sweeper, slider, that's 4 pitches, curveball, that's 5, cutter, 6, and then the splitter, 7. You throw all those different pitches every day that you pitch. Some pitches aren't going to work, and then some pitches are going to work, and you can kind of lean on that day which one does work. So, if the splitter's not working, you can go to more cutters. If the cutter's not working, more sinkers, whatever the case. So it's an interesting, way to go about it. It seems like a lot of Japanese pitchers, that's how they do it. Like Yu Darvish, Yamamoto, doesn't have as many pitches as Shohei, but he does mix it up a lot. That's just the way they like to do it. They like to have the whole kitchen sink, ton of pitches. And, Shohei is, he's a really smart guy. I've told you before how I've learned a lot about Blake Snell, how smart of a pitcher he is, and I've learned that about Shohei. He's very smart, but he will, he'll just blow you away with the fastball at sometimes, but he is not afraid to lean on his, like, elite off-speed and breaking balls, because he's got a lot of them that are really good. Again, it's not just the sweeper. He's got a good slider, and his curveball, like, is arguably one of his best pitch this year. That pitch didn't get hit in the regular season, but for his career, it's always been his splitter. So, interesting guy, interesting stuff, and that's just, we've just spent 15 minutes basically talking about him, and it was all his pitching. Now we can go over to the hitting. It's really cool. He's the 12th person in big league history to have a 3-homer game in the postseason. I think that it's happened 13 times because I think Babe Ruth did it twice, but he's the 12th man ever to do that. That's kind of like, if you don't know, that's kind of like a beloved number in the postseason. Like, hitting 3 home runs in the postseason is like pitching a no-hitter in the regular season. Like, it's one of those things where most people who are baseball historians can count on their hands, like the guys who did that. Obviously, Babe Ruth did that, but Albert Pujols did that in the World Series. Pablo Sandoval, Kike obviously did it in the postseason. Obviously now Shohei. There's been other guys, so that's one of those like really noticeable things in history when you hit when you have a 3 home run game in the postseason. It's just very rare. It doesn't happen, and when it does happen, it's one of the coolest things. So again, the fact that he did that while pitching is just, it's amazing. The first one he hit was off of Quintana. I was watching it live, and if you guys know Shohei, when he struggles, he tends to chase breaking balls down and away a lot from left-handers. So literally when it was a 3-2 count, Jose Quintana rocks and gets ready to fire, I literally said to myself, don't chase the breaking ball down and away. And to his credit, he didn't miss it. It wasn't thrown low and away. It was left right over the plate. He absolutely crushed it, almost hit it out of the stadium. And, something that's funny is that if you guys saw on social media the other day, Shohei hit on the field for the first time in batting practice. I think this was after Game 2 when they flew back to L.A. He, some guys do that. There are some guys who only hit BP down in the cages. They don't hit on the field. I think Bryce Harper is a guy like that too. Like, there are some guys who they don't like to hit on the field. They don't really care about seeing the ball off the bat, go out, leave the stadium, or hitting the ball into the outfield. They just focus on their swing down in the cage. And then there are other guys who like to hit the ball, like to hit on the field. It's just personal preference. So Shohei was obviously trying to work on some things and switch some things up. And there was the video that got dropped of him hitting the ball out of the stadium, which is just amazing. And obviously his second at bat, he did hit the ball out of the stadium. And it's just like another thing about his like aura and his just like greatness. It was like he was practicing to hit balls out of the stadium. And that was like one of the cooler home runs for me because first of all, that pitch wasn't even a strike. It was down and in. And, sometimes Shohei swings at pitches way inside, and there's times when you're watching him on TV and you're like, why did he swing at that pitch? It was way inside. And these were one of those times where it was like Shohei knew that he was going to try to pound him in with cutters, so he kind of just backed off the plate a little bit. And even though the pitch looked like it was way inside, it wasn't a strike. It just was right into Shohei's wheelhouse. And again, just amazing. He's throwing 100 miles an hour and hitting the ball almost out of the stadium and then out of the stadium. And then obviously the third at-bat against Trevor McGill, who is no slouch. He's a big man, one of the better relievers for the Brewers. A 2-strike pitch. I said earlier it was down the middle. It was kind of more inside. Then Shohei hits it out to left center. Center, left center. A line drive that didn't just get out. It was out by a few, it was like a few bleachers deep. Third home run of the game. Everybody was just going crazy. The reactions of the players, like they were showing the bullpen guys were going nuts. The guys in the dugout, Muncy, Freddie Freeman, and Tommy Edman, like they were just losing their minds. And then obviously all the people in the stands. It's one of those amazing moments and amazing games where you'll never forget like where you were when you saw that, where when you were watching, and just, it's made me think this postseason and some of these cool moments, when stuff like that happens, it makes you reflect on, all like the whole big picture, if you will, like the whole season, and then even farther, like how all the postseasons the Dodgers have played in, all the World Series, all that kind of stuff. And I've been trying to like hone that in and just focus on like right now. That'll be a pod for later if the Dodgers are able to go on to win the World Series. We can kind of do some reflecting on going back to back and winning their third World Series in the last 6 years, and just reflecting. I'm trying to stay in the moment of this like dominant postseason run that we're seeing right now. And there was no more dominant game than this, and probably won't ever be. We'll see what Shohei has left in store for us in the World Series. Another cool narrative going forward is going to be, him making his first World Series start on the mound. So it truly was the greatest postseason, game of all time. Because obviously, I don't think anyone's ever hit 4 home runs in the postseason, and there's only been one cycle in postseason history. That was Brock Holt. And, There's only been obviously 2 no-hitters, 1 perfect game, but nobody's ever done it both. A 3-homer game. It would have been the greatest postseason game ever with 2 home runs because he had 10 strikeouts, 2 home runs, and then you hit the 3rd home run and you kind of make it more magical. Like I said, the 3 home run games in the postseason is like a magical kind of thing. It's just like amazing. You really like have no words for it. I was at home yesterday with my family, and my mom, my grandpa, like even people who aren't crazy Dodger fans like myself are like amazed, like, wow, he's hitting, he's pitching, he's doing both, he's hitting home runs out of the stadium. It really is like, again, I'm trying not to get too much out of this moment. I'm trying to not reflect too much on things. I'm trying to stay in the moment, enjoy this right now, and then after the postseason is when it's time to kind of do some reflecting, where we're at in time. But Mookie Betts had a great quote after the game. He said, we're the Bulls and he's Michael Jordan. And it's really true. Like, we'll see what happens if the Dodgers go back-to-back, and, we'll see how it all plays out. But we really are watching the greatest player ever in his prime. Like, smack dab at the peak of his powers, we're watching. It really is like watching Michael Jordan in the middle of their dynasty. This really is what we're watching. Nowadays, with the way social media is and sports media, we love to like look for the next hot thing. Like we're really impatient as a society. We're always ready to look to the next thing. Like a perfect example is like a couple of years ago when Tom Brady in the NFL retired. He was the GOAT. You always hear that term. He was the greatest quarterback of all time. And as soon as he retired and Patrick Mahomes started to win a little bit more, now all of a sudden everybody's like, well, could Patrick Mahomes be the GOAT? Could he pass Tom Brady? And I understand, like I said, we're in a fast news cycle. We always want to look for the next thing. But realistically, it's like, can you have the guy's career play out a little bit? And part of that is because Mahomes is amazing and, went on to win 3 Super Bowls before he's like 30 years old. But still, it's like we just called this guy the GOAT, and now we're ready to call the next guy the GOAT. It's like we're always ready to move on to the next thing. And so I always try to, temper expectations or temper, quotes or, feelings like that. But it really isn't. I really don't think that jumping the gun when you're calling him the greatest player of all time, because it's just like there's nobody who's ever done that. Obviously Babe Ruth is the only close comparison, but I believe Babe Ruth only pitched and hit like for 1 year at a time. He never really did both. He was a pitcher with the Red Sox, and then realized that him and those around him realized that he was a great hitter and he should just do that full time. So he never really did it as much as Shohei. Shohei's pretty much had like I want to say 3 or 4 years where he was a full-time two-way player, and he's going to go on to win his 4th MVP this year in 2025. So, when it comes to that stuff, like I said, the greatest player of all time, I try to live in the moment more, because we're always looking for the next all-time. Like every time a team wins the NBA Finals or the Super Bowl or the World Series, the next day on ESPN, one of the most talked about things is, are we going to see a dynasty? Like the OKC Thunder just won the NBA title, and that's like one of the biggest things. Are we going to see a dynasty? And it's like we just want to jump ahead to the ending. And sometimes you got to be able to stay in the moment and just enjoy this. And while I understand all those questions and all that stuff, you got to live in the moment. But with Shohei, it's not jumping the gun. It's real. He really is the best player of all time because nobody's ever done this. And now we're finally getting to see him in the postseason. He has an ERA on the mound in the postseason of 2.25, and he has an OPS of 967. He's dominating on both sides. I know that a lot of the offensive stuff is carried by this one game, but those are his numbers for the postseason. I mean, the postseason's a smaller sample size, and that's what he's done so far. So it's just amazing that, we're finally getting to see him. His superpower is that he's a two-way player. He is one of the better pitchers in the game, one of the better hitters in the game, and there's nobody else on the planet who can say that. And now we're getting to see that play out on the biggest stage in the most important games with the highest stakes. And the fact that he did that is just amazing. Like, that will be probably the greatest game of his career and like the highlight of his career, that game. We'll see. Maybe he can go on to do something even better in the World Series, but it's just amazing. And like I said, we really are watching the best player of all time at the peak of his powers in the middle of his prime. Like, that's what we're watching. It's like LeBron in the middle of his career, Michael Jordan in the middle of his career, Babe Ruth in the middle of his career, Barry Bonds, Mike Trout, Patrick Mahomes, Tom Brady. Like, we're watching that at the highest peak of their powers on the biggest stage. So just amazing stuff. So obviously now at this point, we're going to have to wait for the winner of the ALCS. Is going to a Game 7 tonight at the time of this recording. I've always been preparing for the Blue Jays, just like I told you guys I was preparing for the Brewers and the Phillies. I don't care who wins it, whether it's the Mariners, whether it's the Blue Jays. I think the Dodgers are better than both of them, and I think that they can and will beat them. I think that if it's the Blue Jays, it'll be a better series because I think they're a little better than the Mariners. They have a little bit of a better lineup that's more consistent. They play good defense. The Mariners are a team that hits a lot of home runs and have a good offense, but they do strike out a lot. They don't have a great defense, and they're pitching what they used to be built on. It hasn't been as good this year as it was in the past. Guys like Luis Castillo, Kirby Yates, Logan Gilbert, those guys aren't as good as they were a few years ago. But either way, I think both World Series possibilities would be a good option, because it would be the Blue Jays, Canada, first time since '93, and then it would be the Mariners, who have never been to a World Series, against the Dodgers. So that'll be some cool stuff. And like I said, whoever wins later in the week, I should be able to preview that series. So we'll see what happens. I'm preparing for the Blue Jays, and I think that's who we're gonna face. And I'm not sure, I saw this a little while ago. I thought that either way, whoever wins, the Dodgers would go on the road, but I actually think I saw that if the Blue Jays do win, then the Dodgers will definitely go on the road for Game 1 to Toronto. But if it's the Mariners, then Game 1 is actually in LA. I didn't realize that, so that would actually be cool if the Mariners win. Then I guess the Dodgers play at home. We'll see. I'm not sure if all that's true, but that's where we're going to wrap up. So thank you guys for listening. I hope you guys enjoyed. The Dodgers go to the World Series for the 5th time in the last 9 seasons. Like I said, at some point in the future, we'll kind of look back at all these cool things and just do some reflecting. But right now, we're staying in the moment. Game 1 of the World Series is this Friday. We'll see where it plays out. So thank you guys for listening. As always, you can get this podcast on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Follow us on all social media at Talking Blue Pod. You can follow myself at Talking Blue Nick on X, live tweeting, breaking down videos, player breakdowns, all that kind of stuff. And then as well on Reddit at competitive-week8715. Thank you guys again for listening. Episode 70 of Talking Blue. We'll be back to preview the World Series later this week and get you guys ready for Game 1, which will be on Friday. We'll see who it's against. Comment below. Who would you rather play? Who do you think it's going to be? All that stuff. Your thoughts on Shohei's amazing game. Thank you guys so much for listening. We'll see you guys next time.